Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the diplomatic term normalization. The United States has successfully brokered a series of normalization deals between Israel and moderate Arab states in the Middle East. Everyone knows that. Washington acted, forged ahead, turned obstacles into footnotes on agreements, and in so doing, changed the world. There is no longer a united Arab world dedicated to destroying, or at least obstructing, the small Jewish state located in their midst. A new era, a more enlightened era, is upon us. The deals cascaded into partnerships and investments, and so some of the new deals are directly between Israel and the Arab neighbor, whoever dealt with the normalization agreement. Others are a three-way partnership between the United States, playing a significant role and benefiting in a significant way. This was, after all, diplomacy. It's not altruism. As good as these deals are for Israel, as positive as they are for each of the Arab nations that signed on to them, these deals first and foremost advance U.S. interests. They advance their world interests. The United States, sidelined by Russia for the past several years, has repositioned itself as both a deal maker and a peacemaker in the region. These deals reaffirm the position of the United States as a serious player in the Middle East, as a player that makes an impact. It's significant in terms of its change. U.S. influence in the region has been slipping and sliding. For nearly a decade, the United States has been virtually absent. Other than for Israel, Washington and Foggy Bottom have consciously decided to abandon that part of the world. Militarily, that has not changed. Diplomatically, it has changed. Economically, it has changed. And the United States is still withdrawing many of its forces from the region. Military scaled down. Diplomatic and commercial influences raised up. Abandonment of the Middle East by the United States began during the 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration. It was then that the role of the United States diminished, bit by bit, and then almost entirely. That diminution, that departure, that vacuum, it created a huge vacuum, and the Russians were only too happy to step up their involvement in the region. So too were the Iranians. And then China found a way in too. U.S. world influence was teetering. The compelling force behind the decision of the United States to re-enter the Middle East region and create these agreements between Arab nations and Israel was to check the influence of Iran and in the Middle East. Then came the influences of Russia and China. The pieces on the world diplomatic chessboard are moving around. The United States is now once again directly influencing areas that Russia and China were claiming as their own. This diplomatic muscling by the United States and the tag-along of Israel refocuses attention and divides countries down the line. Countries in the region must now make a public choice. They must identify which side they're on. Syria, Turkey, Qatar, and the Palestinians are on the side of Iran and Russia. Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Jordan, and Egypt are on the side of the United States and Israel. Many Gulf states, with the notable exceptions of Qatar and Iran, are considering normalization with Israel. Many will soon join that side of the board. This is a massive move on the diplomatic chessboard. Iran, Russia, and China are expert at the game of diplomatic chess, but none of them saw this coming. None of them believed that Donald Trump had the skill to pull any of these agreements off. And to do it in the final stretches of his presidential election campaign was a complete surprise. The leadership of Iran, Russia, Turkey, and the Palestinian Authority all rooted for a massive defeat of Trump. A resounding Trump loss at the polls would be proof that they are correct, that normalization with Israel is wrong. The best part of the normalization is that, unlike peace treaties, normalization deals are predicated on economic and other exchanges, and those are already shaping up. Deals on tourism, high-tech, and biotech are being signed. Investments from Arab countries and corporations into startups have begun to pour into Israel. These results are immediate. There are those who believe that these deals go to prove that the United States and Israel are so very connected and so very closely linked. They are connected in many ways, but it's important to note that these deals prove that there's other elements, because above all else, these deals were done to help the United States. Knowing that Israel is a stable democracy in the region is an important constant. Relying on Israel's military strength and the ability to use it offers an added advantage. Israel's quick response and measured military strikes are very important cachet. that the United States knows is important when sizing up enemy powers and armies. But believe me, Russia and the Iranians also know that, and they're using the same calculus. From the point of view of the White House, these normalization deals were certainly a feather in the cap of the Trump campaign. But honestly, and I say this as someone whose bailiwick is foreign affairs, very few people's votes are swayed by foreign affairs. Globally important, certainly, but it will not move the dial. Just Google or Bing Jordan. The first entries are for sneakers and basketball, not the country in the Middle East. People care more about their Air Jordan sneakers by Nike than they do about Amman Jordan. The real measure of success of a peace deal is sports. And now, and I've spoken about this before, now that Israel and the United Arab Emirates have signed normalization agreements, sports competitions have begun. Days after the agreement was signed, Maccabi Haifa Football Club, FC, announced a cooperation agreement with the United Arab Emirates Al Ain Football Club. They will play a friendly match in Abu Dhabi very soon. The exact date has yet to be set. Maccabi owner Yaakov Shachar summed it up this way, and I'm quoting here: "I am happy to inform you that our club has been invited to hold a friendly soccer match called the Game of Peace in Abu Dhabi. I have always believed it was possible to develop friendly relations through sports. We will sign a memorandum of understanding between the two clubs in a matter of days to create the relationship that will include collaboration on both the sporting and business side." Al Ain is the United Arab Emirates national winning team. They've won local championships 13 times, the Super Cup 5 times. In 2018, they lost to Real Madrid in the final Club World Cup. Real Madrid is Europe's champion, and even losing to them is an honor. This will be a great football match. More than that, it is a big step towards forging real peace between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an editorial from the Times of Israel. It was published on September 23rd, 2020, and it was written by Mark Levinson. The column is entitled, "An Eternal Hero Eternally Reimagined, Ansky's Dybbuk Turns 100." Subtitled, "The Supernatural Thriller, a Courtroom Drama, a Tale of Love and Obsession, and an Elegy for Dying Culture. This Fiddler on the Roof meets The Exorcist has something for everyone." This column celebrates the 100th anniversary of the premiere performance of Shaul Ansky's masterful play, The Dybbuk. Levinson walks through the story and shows how the story remains so enticing these 100 years since 1920. Full disclosure, Mark Levinson is a friend. I've known him for years. He's a very creative writer and novelist. This is how Levinson begins. When the Vilna troupe staged the world premiere of S. Ansky's The Dybbuk at the Elysium Theater in Warsaw 100 years ago, on December 9th, 1920, it could not anticipate the phenomenon it was unleashing upon the world. The play about a Dybbuk, or a disembodied spirit that possesses a young woman and is exorcised to a tragic result, was an immediate hit and went on to become the most popular play of Yiddish theater. Today it continues to be performed around the world in a stream of new translations and adaptations by companies ranging from the Royal Shakespeare Company to New York's La Mama Experimental Theater. Tony Kushner has adapted it, Sidney Lumet has directed it, Broadway has hosted it, Jerome Robbins and Leonard Bernstein created one of at least 2 ballets based on it. Habima, the National Theater of Israel, made it its signature piece, and there have been theatrical films, a television show, operas, even puppet theater productions. The enduring popularity of the Dybbuk can be attributed to its being far more than a ghost story, A Fiddler on the Roof meets The Exorcist. In addition to being a supernatural thriller, it is a courtroom drama, a tale of love and obsession, and an elegy for the dying culture. In short, it has something for everyone. Now Levinson describes the main theme of the play. It's really about the conflict of opposites, about friends, about broken promises of marriage, a shidduch, and about death. And in this case, the one who dies stalks the living. It's about rich and poor, about good and bad. Levinson writes, the play carries the subtitle Between Two Worlds, which is a key both to understanding the original text and its continuing allure. The worlds between which it is situated includes the worlds of the rich and poor, heaven and earth, dreams and reality. The friction within each pair gives the Dybbuk its tension and resonance, as well as its unending inspiration to the creative artists who have grappled with it over the years. The Dybbuk nods to the dichotomy in its opening moment, when in pitch darkness, as rendered by translator S. Morris Engel, a low mystic chant is heard as if coming from afar. Wherefore, oh wherefore has the soul fallen from the exalted heights to profoundest depths? Within itself the fall contains the ascension. Levinson now offers historical perspective and comes to his conclusion. He explains that Between Two Worlds not only describes the themes of the play, but also the man who wrote it. By 1912, with Hitler's rise 2 decades away, Ansky already saw the Jewish spirit struggling to maintain itself against forces of overpowering destruction. He was determined to do something about it. Over 2 years, he conducted an ethnographic expedition throughout the Jewish villages of Eastern Europe, collecting thousands of folktales, songs, photographs, manuscripts, religious objects. Steeped in these remnants of a vanishing world, Ansky wrote the Dybbuk in 1914 and spent the next few years seeking a production. On that fateful night in Warsaw 100 years ago, the only thing missing was Ansky himself. He had died of pneumonia 30 days before the premiere, which the Vilna troupe hastily produced as a memorial to him. Or perhaps Ansky was there, a Dybbuk of his own, hovering over the world in which his business was still unfinished. Next up is a column by Michael Milstein. The column was published in Ynet on October 23, 2020, and is entitled, Palestinians Have Had Century of Glorious Missed Opportunities. Subtitled, Opinion, the Palestinian people must decide whether to remain shackled to their need for historic justice or understand some painful concessions must be made in order for them to achieve their dream of independence. Milstein begins showing historical perspective. The Palestinians have continuously made wrong decisions. No question about it. He writes, 5 Jews and 4 Arabs were killed and hundreds more were injured in Jerusalem riots, which began with Arab protests against Zionism and the occupying British forces. The Jaffa riots began with a clash between members of the Jewish Communist Party and Achdut HaAvodah, the Labor Unity Party, in the city, which then devolved into a full-blown lynching of local Jewish residents by Arab neighbors. The riots quickly spread across the entire country and resulted in hundreds of both Arab and Jewish dead, mainly at the hands of the British forces, and hundreds of wounded on both sides. While there had previously been friction between Jews and Arabs in the pre-state Palestine, the events of 1920 and 21 were different. The clashes promoted by Arabs who lived in separate from the rest of the country's residents and whose unique militaristic identity was nurtured by their constant fighting with both the Jews and the British forces stationed in Palestine, Israel. Many considered these two history-defining events as the birth of the modern Palestinian national movement. Milstein concludes by explaining the following. Both Israelis and Palestinians are currently marching towards a one-state solution that would see them living in one country. A solution is nothing but volatile. Both sides must decide whether they are willing to step into such a future before separation becomes all but impossible. An interesting conclusion by Milstein. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 3 pictures today. The first picture welcomes people to the Christopher Walken School of English. Make note of the punctuation. Look at the 2 columns and the period. What are they doing there? And they call themselves the School of English? Next up is a correction. In the newspaper, the correction was necessary because it mistakenly reported that John Henniger's bandmate, Eric Layday, was on drugs. The story should have read that Layday was on drums. Finally, here's a cartoon making fun of this very difficult year. A wife reminds her husband, "Don't forget, we gain an hour this weekend." Her husband responds, "Does anyone really want an extra hour of 2020? In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. In countries like Saudi Arabia, official media offers a clue to understanding how the leadership is thinking and the direction of the kingdom and which direction it's moving in. Recently, official Saudi media has changed its tone about Israel and normalization agreements. Here is a quote from Saudi official Faisal Abbas that ran in the largest Saudi English language paper. Scolding the Palestinian leadership, he asks, when will they learn that every time they turn away from the negotiating table, the pie only gets smaller? Faisal continues saying that the fault was, quote, not on all one side, unquote, and that Israel also makes it difficult to reach a deal to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That was one example of changing Saudi attitude. Here's another. On Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, the Saudi News Twitter site changed its logo to Shana Tova, Happy New Year in Hebrew. And another official state media ran a 3-day special, an hour each day, interviewing Prince Bandar, in which he criticized Palestinians and all those who have been critical of the kingdom's advances with Israel and the Gulf states' normalization agreements. All this would have been unheard of just months ago. The Saviz is officially a merchant ship registered to Iran. It has been suggested by intelligence analysts that the Saviv is really an intelligence ship, monitoring and transmitting everything they see. The ship is anchored at the southern end of the Red Sea, off the coast of Yemen in the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb. The location is a chokehold for oil and the goods as they make their way going both to Europe and through the Suez Canal at the northern end of the Red Sea, and going off to, of course, Africa, Asia, and coming south. There are two undeniable proofs that the Saviv is an Iranian Revolutionary Guard intelligence ship. First, we see them on the ship in uniforms. Second, the ship has barely moved in 3 years. It just sits and observes. Monitoring every single ship that enters and exits the Red Sea provides Iran with a treasure trove of intelligence. A branch of ISIS has been terrorizing residents of the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. In July, they attacked a series of villages in northern Sinai, planting explosives in the homes of the residents, but no one knew that they did that. The Egyptian army cleared out the villages. ISIS evacuated. That means that they left without conflict. But the Egyptian army neglected to sweep the booby traps, those bombs. Over the past few weeks, 14 people have been killed by explosives planted in their homes by ISIS. This entire experience proves several axioms. First, ISIS is bent on murdering as many innocent people as they can. They planted explosives for that very reason in people's homes. Second, the Egyptian army was totally outsmarted by ISIS. They should have had their sappers sweep every home and every site for explosives. People have been murdered. The murderers, ISIS, are smiling. That must not happen again. The official announcement is out. The United States, under President Donald J. Trump, will now permit the United States citizens born in Jerusalem to list the country Israel as their birthplace. Until now, if a baby and a child of a United States citizen was born in Jerusalem, their passport would list Jerusalem as their city of birth. But under country of birth, it would be blank because it was Jerusalem. There would be no country of birth because, according to U.S. policy, Jerusalem is still in question and in doubt. That ended in December 2017, when the United States recognized Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. This is a slam dunk issue. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Congress does not have the ability to determine foreign policy and recognize capitals. Just presidents do. In practical terms, that means the President of the United States can decide to put Israel on the passport because Jerusalem is indeed located in Israel. The first passport has already been issued. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information.
Es wird nicht helfen, kein Philistinisch, kein Geweih, als us lebt, mir soll immer vergehen. In hast die dein Freit, wirst die euch weinen in Gichen, du soll leben für ein Mensch, ist ja Teuten Tanz geglichen.
We spoke about Ansky, Shaul Ansky, and the Dybbuk. It's both a Yiddish and Hebrew classic, and that's important. Many Yiddish and Hebrew writers wrote both in Hebrew and in Yiddish. They wrote in both languages. It was a common crossover. Many of these artists, authors, playwrights were friends. They had great interactions, meetings, coffee klatches, and for many of them, actually, they worked together as writers for the numerous Hebrew and Yiddish papers and periodicals published in Europe, many times under different names. In other words, they wrote under different names in order to make certain that they had a different identity. This is how they made their living, by writing for the papers. Ansky asked his friend Chaim Nachman Bialik to translate the Dybbuk into Hebrew. Bialik said yes, of course, and did a masterful job. In an interesting twist of fate, this one has a happy ending. Ansky was on a train one day and lost his original manuscript of the Dybbuk. It was the only copy. Ansky asked Bialik to please retranslate the Dybbuk back into Yiddish from the Hebrew. What a story. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.